Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. Can you meet me in the Gospel of John chapter 11? We are surveying John's Gospel that you and I might believe. And in John chapter 11, we are given perhaps the most powerful proof of all as to why we ought to believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The very beginning of John chapter 11 takes us to the village of Bethany, just about 2 miles away from the great city of Jerusalem. And it's here in Bethany that we're going to run across this powerful proof that what Jesus said in our study last Sunday morning is absolutely true. You might remember hearing Jesus in John 10, verse 37 say, "If I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, the works of my Father, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father." Throughout John's Gospel, we have been seeing what John refers to as signs provided by Jesus that he really was from the Father in heaven. Here in John chapter 11, we've got the greatest sign of all. We're introduced to 3 siblings beginning in verse 1. There was a certain man who was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. We'll hear more about that in the next chapter, next Sunday. It was Mary and Martha's brother, Lazarus, who was ill. So in verse 3, the sisters sent to Jesus saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." What did he mean by that? We'll turn that over in our minds as a class together. For now, in verse 5, John wants to make sure we understand Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Why did he do that? Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." And when they hear this, they're not sure that's a great idea. "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you." We heard that in John chapter 10. "And are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." After saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." They said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will recover." Now, John tells us Jesus had spoken of Lazarus's death, but they thought that he meant he was taking rest in sleep. And so Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe." That's what we're getting all over John's Gospel, evidence as to why we might believe. Jesus says, "Let us go to him." So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." They come to Bethany, And when Jesus arrives, he finds that Lazarus has been in the tomb already for 4 days. Look down in verse 21. Eventually, Martha, one of the sisters, comes to Jesus, and she says to him in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And she responds, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Notice this. This is really important, what Jesus said in verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. This is the 5th time in John's gospel Jesus has said, I am. We heard him say, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. Now, incredibly, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Martha says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the anointed one, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Mary, the other sister, eventually comes to Jesus, and when she saw him, she falls at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And John wants to make sure we see this is a very emotional experience for Jesus. In verse 33, when he saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They tell him, Lord, come and see. Incredibly, verse 35 just tells us, Jesus wept. In verse 38, as he comes to the tomb, deeply moved again, it was a cave and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of Lazarus, says to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor. He's been dead 4 days. Jesus looks at Martha and says, didn't I tell you that if you believed, notice this, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Throughout John's gospel, we have seen absolutely amazing signs. But this, the last one that John records for us in his gospel, is perhaps the most incredible one of all. Now, as a class, we'll look at the last few verses of John chapter 11, and even here, a direct sign pointing to the glory of God. Some refuse to see God's glory in Jesus and what he had done. What about you? What about me? Let's talk about it. Thank you so much for being in class today. I hope I've set you up for good discussion, that you have a great rest of your class and a great start to this new week.